morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm not sure why I was invited to attend this meeting and address you. Because I'm a psychiatrist, psychiatry has to do with what we're dealing with, but indirectly, not exactly very relevant. Anyway, I would prefer to speak about the results of the election yesterday. They were very satisfactory for me. So I'm very happy about it. Also, before yesterday, I came back from Bucharest. I saw something that may be relevant to what you are talking here. I would like to touch on this. What I saw was an aggressive attempt on the part of pharmaceutical companies to influence people, psychiatrists, basically, because that was a psychiatric meeting, to prescribe medications that the particular firm. This aggressive attitude, I think, should be condemned. Not right to try to influence scientists and direct the way prescribe. I know that congresses depend on the money derived from the company, but they really. So I would like to report that to you. I have expressed my opinion to my Romanian colleagues. Actually, this happened in Greece as well, but many years now. On the other hand, we have the opposite. What is the opposite? Some people object to medication in general. They claim that it's a very bad thing to give drugs to people, to should only give them psychotherapy. Drugs have side effects, and we obey the directions of the pharmaceutical company. This has led some people to reject psychopharmacology as a whole. This is equally wrong, and I would like to stress this. This is bad. You can't reject psychopharmacology. Pharmacology in general, not only mental illness, my specialty. You give them drugs, you poison them, and things like that. So I think one should follow a course which is in between, not excessive industrial involvement, no rejection of science which has been useful to humanity and will continue to be useful to humanity and all of us. Thank you for your patience.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's also my pleasure to welcome you to this very important event. My name is Yannis Ioannidis. I'm a professor of informatics and telecommunications of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens, this institution. So Christos brings the bio part, I bring the digital part, so that's there. Which are the two pillars of the main theme of this event. I want to thank also the organizers, and first among them, I want to call to the podium Professor Emeritus Panos Maseras, who is the soul of this event, and to greet us as we start.
So, dear colleagues, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the historical building of the National and Capodistrian University of Athens. This peculiar word, Capodistrian, is the name of the first prime minister here in Greece after the revolution in 1821. This is one of the oldest universities in Europe. The historical city of Athens, the birthplace of Socrates and Plato, the home of philosophy, democracy, and culture, is an ideal setting for providing the atmosphere and environment for the memorial meeting of the legendary Professor Laszlo Andreni. Laszlo studied chemical engineering in Budapest. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 led to Laszlo's relocation to Canada. Since then, he made his exceptional contributions in the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology at the University of Toronto. I had the first contact with Laszlo in 1984 when he sent me a reprint request. You remember the little cards at that time. It's from 1984, so you cannot read it actually. He also sent me another reprint request 4 years later. This slide shows my answer dated 11 May 1988. I was very happy and proud at that time, since I was relatively young and Laszlo's reputation was already all around the world. Later on, he invited me to the University of Toronto while I was at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. My visit and talk to the University of Toronto was the start of a continuous interaction in studies dealing with oral drug absorption and, in particular, in bioequivalence. As an example, I refer to the improvement of his method on the use of metric for the assessment of equivalence of absorption rates published in pharmaceutical research. Laszlo was always and still remains a role model for me. I used to say that wise people like Laszlo think differently than the average person. We have met up with him in many congresses organized here in Athens, in Budapest, and many cities in the USA. This photo is from a boat cruise to the Saronic Gulf Islands. From left to right is Professor Pat De Luca, Professor Kama Mida, Laszlo, and myself. From this trip is our photo in the Athea temple on Aegina Island. Okay. Through the years, Laszlo and I developed a genuine friendship, of which I'm proud. I'll be forever indebted to Laszlo. A few months before his death, he, together with Professor Robert Dees, edited a special issue of Journal of Pharmacokinetics and Pharmacodynamics in April 2019 as a tribute to my contributions to science. I also have to confess that Laszlo was a strong supporter of my nominations for the awards I have received from the American Association of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Laszlo passed away on December 14, 2020. Less than a year later, the International Conference in Pharmaceutical Drug Development, Quality Control and Regulatory Science took place in Budapest, 15-17 of November 2021. This was a meeting in a series of meetings, in each of which Laszlo, with his sly sense of humor, his wisdom, and his inborn talent for helping others was there to help and advise us. For all of us who had the good fortune to know Laszlo as a friend and colleague, the decision for organizing a meeting in his memory was more than an obligatory moral duty. The following colleagues participating in the Budapest meeting, most of them present in the audience today: Leslie Bennett, Henning Blume, Attila Hinchal, Imre Klebovic, Jose Moraes, Carl Peck, Vino Sa, Milena Takac, Clive Willison, Urve Paver, Stefan Murbelach agreed to the organization of this memorial meeting in Athens. Due to budget limitations, all colleagues agreed to pay the registration fees as well as their travel and accommodation expenses. I would like to thank all of them for their contributions and support in bringing this meeting in fruition. I would like now to thank the pharmaceutical companies Elpen, Demo, and Refarm, and especially Vasilis Pentafrangas, Theodor Trifon, Dimitris Demos, Vasilis Parenzolou, Aris Mitsopoulos, and George Halkias, who supported the registration fees of postgraduate students of the laboratories of pharmaceutical technology and biopharmaceutics, pharmacokinetics, Faculty of Pharmacy, University of Athens, for attending the meeting. Unfortunately, they are still sleeping because of the yesterday's elections, and they are not around as yet. Hopefully, we will be around later on. I'm also indebted to Dr. Anastasios Argyriou, who made a donation in memory of one of my closest friends, Professor of Mathematics Michalis Michael Yuriakovis, who passed away a year ago. Michalis was delightful, charming, and amusing, with a disarming smile. He co-edited a Greek book in 2019 entitled Panos Maseras, the man, human being, it means man, the teacher, the researcher. It was a period of depression for me, for some educational reasons, and Michalis contributed with Professor Kitas and another professor, Michael Koutsouliaris, to write this book, to edit this book for me. I always discuss with him the mathematics of my scientific papers. He was always encouraging and supportive. He had a deep interest in my most recent work on the development of the finite absorption time. I will keep as a permanent memory the genuine friendship and the discussions I had with Laszlo and Michalis. I dedicate this poem by Yorgos Seferis, which nicely suits them, to these unforgettable friends. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both our Now we proceed with three divided presentations, about 20 minutes time. The first one, I want to invite my Professor of Informatics and Telecommunications at Athens, a colleague of mine. His office is a few doors away from me. And also President of the Athena Research Center, which is focusing exclusively on digital technologies, but also their applications. Yanis has Berkeley, the University of Athens. Yanis will talk about from mathematics to algorithms. Yanni, you have.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice introduction. Thanks to the organizers for the invitation. My topic is not going to be so broad as the title. I'm going to focus on mathematical, algorithmical methods that are used in structural bioinformatics, drug design, folding, docking, and related problems. So my outline is going to include standard methods from scientific computing, I would say, geometric computing, and I would like to talk about machine learning methods that are today very powerful. And a big question, of course, that becomes relevant is how to combine the two, how to exploit existing methods that we have already used and we have optimized and we are very familiar with all the new approaches that are based on machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I'm going to present to you 5 vignettes, if time allows, that mix the two kinds of approaches. My main theme is going to be that we need mathematics and algorithmic foundations even when we do machine learning, in order to do machine learning correctly. So, as I said, I'm going to focus on bioinformatics and more particularly structural bioinformatics. I'm interested in the 3D structure of molecules. As you know, there are 3 main experimental approaches today that yield 3D structures, and I'm going to touch upon 2 of them in my talk. NMR spectroscopy provides distances in solution, but with some error. I'm going to talk about cryo-electron microscopy, which is the newest of the 3, but is becoming very popular these days and allows us to use very powerful machinery for machine learning. I'm not going to touch upon X-ray crystallography, which again uses a lot of geometry, but we don't have time to cover everything. So, starting with NMR, as I said, it's a method based on measuring distances of molecules in solution. If the distances are small, comparatively small, less than 5 angstrom, they are pretty accurate. If they are longer, the only data that we have essentially is upper and lower bounds on the true distance. And to the rescue comes a very standard theory by the name of distance geometry that is very much used in other engineering principles like robotics, architecture. I have some examples there. In the transparency, you also see the equivalence of the cyclohexane molecule with a small robotics mechanism. Same degrees of freedom, 6 rotational degrees of 6 dihedral angles for the cyclohexane, 6 rotational degrees of freedom for the robot arm that has to close on itself because the cyclohexane is a ring molecule. Okay. So we have some mathematical tools that we can exploit here. The main one is that if I have a graph of distances, the question of finding coordinates that will satisfy these distances is called embedding, and it has already been studied. So the idea is to embed this distance information to Euclidean space, to 3D space, and to find coordinates for the points that satisfy the given distances. If the problem is exact, if the input is exact, we know very much, we know very well how many distances are required in order to obtain a finite number of structures. If we have even more constraints, there will be only one structure, one solution. Okay. So this is the exact setting. It's fully understood in the plane, in 2 dimensions. It's not as well understood in 3D, but again, we have a couple of theorems there, and we use them in order to go to the real problem, which is noisy data, but more information, more or less noisy information on every distance in the molecule. So the first problem that we tackled was to enumerate all possible conformations of a molecule if the data were exact. Okay? And this is an example of a work that surprisingly one can get a pretty large number of possible conformations if we have the minimum number of required distances. Some people have used this kind of approaches in studying small molecules, peptides or oligopeptides, like the group of Cecilia Clementi, now in Berlin. So this is distance geometry, and it allows us not only to understand small molecules fully, but also to give asymptotic bounds, that is, bounds as the number of atoms becomes large, and my group was able to derive the first non-trivial upper bounds on the number of possible conformations. Okay? This uses combinatorics, some geometry, and so on, and gives us an idea of the complexity of the problem if the data is exact. Now, if the data is not exact, we have to do numerical computation. So numerical linear algebra is the best understood tool. There is a rank condition on the distance matrix, and we're able, for instance, to compute all conformations of the cyclohexane as they appear in nature. That can also give us an idea of the percentage of the different conformations in a single mix, in a single solution. There is some geometry here that goes into improving the data, improve the intervals that are given by NMR, and eventually to arrive at a solution which is very robust when it comes to local optimization. Of course, it's much harder to work in a global optimization setting. So this example that I'm showing is essentially local optimization. If I'm not far from a conformation, I'm able to find it fast. That's what it says. Okay. So let me go to my second vignette that will look at artificial intelligence methods. So far I emphasized geometric algorithms. I would like to talk about CryoEM now, the other method of structure determination. And a similar neural network is going to help us model the water molecules around the protein surface. So the information we get from CryoEM is essentially a 3D image. CryoEM provides 2D images, 2D projections of the molecule in solution, and then these are assembled to create a 3D density map, an electron density map. So this is the input. The output should be the backbone, even the side chains, as much information on the structure of the protein. So this is the pipeline I just described. The interesting thing is that we have a lot of tools today for studying and modeling image information. So actually the big revolution in AI right now started with 2D input images. It started with segmentation, understanding images, and so on. So we are well prepared for this kind of problems, and I believe it's the next big thing. Actually, my group works very heavily on this because it combines geometry with machine learning. So this is the kind of pipeline we would like to have at the end. The input is a cloud of possible positions, let's say, of the backbone atoms. The output is a chain of the backbone. Okay? So I'm hiding some steps. So there is some pre-processing, then there is the neural network, and then there is some post-processing. We can ask for a segmentation of the side chains. We can ask for a segmentation of the backbone. We can ask for a segmentation of the secondary structure elements. This is the secondary structure elements, for instance, that I'm showing. So this is the pipeline I described. There is a strong team today at the University of Washington. We changed the neural network, and we are changing the pre- and post-processing. So in every one of these little boxes goes some kind of optimization work or some kind of machine learning tool. I'm not going to go into the details, but let me show you the architecture. So today, as you know, neural networks is a whole science or a technology. And it's very important to classify and to know what works and what is the proper architecture to attack the problem. So the UNet is a special architecture that feeds in. You see, it has different steps in the neural network, but each one of the steps gives feedback to one of the end modules of the network. It has this U shape, and it was very, very useful in segmenting images, so we are adapting it to 3D images. And our results are very promising in the second table. The first table shows matching of predicted positions to real positions. We are not doing so well because we are the blue curve, and we don't have a very good percentage. But when it comes to RMSD, so the overall structure, the overall distance from the ground truth, we are better than existing methods. We used a similar neural network to model water molecules around the surface of a protein. Again, we are training with a lot of examples, and we try to predict which kind of water molecules lie on the surface. The thing is that typical methods over-predict. They predict a very large number of water molecules. So we have to train the network accordingly. We tessellate the space around the protein. We ask for candidate positions, and then the neural network will predict which of those are true, and if there is an over-prediction, it will try to get closer to the truth. So there is a lot of geometry in the pre-processing, in organizing the space around the molecule. And then there is the neural network training and inference phase. And of course, there is a post-processing because, as I said, sometimes it over-predicts, so we would like to understand that some of these predicted positions are essentially the same, but they are reported more than once. So this is our current write-up, and again, this is a family of methods that is very similar to the AlphaFold. The AlphaFold is Google's approach to structure prediction. It starts with the sequence information, so it starts with less information from what we are doing, but these architectures are, to a large extent, inspired by the architectures used in AlphaFold. So neural networks, as you know, are machine learning methods that are supervised because we train them with known examples. Clustering is unsupervised. So I have one example of clustering that we used to organize a molecular dynamic simulation. Simulations are a whole bunch of methods kind of orthogonal from what I discussed so far, because they simulate, using Newton's laws, the physics of the conformation until it stabilizes. And in doing so, they produce a very large number of candidate conformations. They have to trim them down. They have to organize them in groups of geometrically similar and kinetically similar structures. So we applied some clustering methods. So this is a specific example, the angiotensin, that has 3 families of structures that are characterized by the distance of the end-to-end amino acid. And an important aspect here, in order to apply our clustering methods, is how to model proteins as a vector of numbers, basically. This is the standard approach. So we would like to think of each protein as a bunch of numbers, as a vector of numbers. So it's a lot of effort goes into selecting coordinates into selecting which distances, which angles, which chemical characteristics we're going to use. Okay. Trial and error, of course, is important, but also the geometry and the chemistry behind it. We managed to bring it down to a distance matrix and observe that 3 eigenvalues of the matrix were enough to cluster correctly the conformations using different clustering methods. So clustering occurs 2 or 3 times during the pipeline of the simulation. And we applied a method that comes from the lab that was designed for very large amount of data. That's why it's called web scale clustering. It's a change over k-means. And so the result is this pipeline. We start with the features. We do some dimensionality reduction, cluster, Markov model is used to model the transition from one state to the other, and then again clustering to reduce the number of candidates. And we realized that the results are very similar to what the biologists would expect and give us insight to the kind of conformations in different solutions, either water or water ethanol. Okay. This is the Markov model to model the transition from one state to the other. So I would like to finish my tour of geometric and machine learning methods by one example of sampling space that will represent states of a metabolic network. So this work comes from system biology, where the chemistry inside the cell is modeled by metabolic networks, and we would like to model the flux in these networks, and also to understand what would be the optimal flux. So it turns out that we can model the transition between the nodes of this graph by linear equations in the unknowns. So once these are linear equations and inequalities, we have a problem that is very similar to linear programming. And we can model it by the feasible region of a linear program, which is a convex polytope. We can construct a matrix. We are looking for the solutions to this linear problem, and the total number of possible solutions are essentially the points inside a convex polytope. Once we model the solution, so the solutions are the different vectors representing flux. Once we model them as a convex polytope, then we can study this polytope by methods that reduce the complexity of the problem, namely sampling. So we can do sampling in very high dimensions. You realize the dimension of this polytope is the number of unknowns in a metabolic network. So it could be in the tens or even hundreds. Okay. So this is a polytope sitting in 500 dimensions. And we would like to understand its volume, the kind of representative states inside the polytope. So we sample. I'm finished. Yes. We sample the polytope, and we wish to compute optimal flux or different solutions to the flux. Okay? And we believe that this kind of work could be applied to practical questions, like we have this paper on anti-COVID-19 targets that studies metabolic networks, and we would like to apply it to this kind of to work. So we have recently published the geometric method, and these are the questions for us coming up. This was my talk. I show you the contents as a conclusion. Thank you very much for your attention.
I don't know if there is any burning question for Professor Emiris on what he presented. Okay, we can move along, and definitely he will be around during the break. Moving along to our second invited presentation, Professor Dionys. Professor in Technology and Process Engineering, Director of the Center for Innovation. Out pharmacy, companies. About 3D printing in pharmacy and
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Before I start, I would like to thank Professor Maseras for the kind invitation. So I'll present you some trends that we have seen in the pharmaceutical sciences over the last few years. And to be honest, there is a tremendous increase in research and development of 3D printing applications, mainly in pharmaceutical industry, but also from academia. So a few historical aspects about 3D printing. It goes way back in 1984. It was developed from Chuck Hull in US. And at that time, the 3D printers were quite expensive, bulky, and can be used only because of the complexity could be used by engineers. Over the last 10 years, we have seen a tremendous transformation of 3D printing technologies, where we have quite cheap printers with unlimited capabilities, as we'll show later on. So they found applications in a lot of different areas, not just pharmaceutical sciences or pharmacy, but also in biomedical sciences, architecture, automotive, and it goes on. A milestone for pharmaceutical industry was 2015, when the first 3D printing pill was manufactured in the US by a company called Aprecia. So they use a specific technology called powder bed printing, and they develop a fast degrading dosage form. And that was particularly great for example, elderly people or children. And since that time, we haven't seen any other marketed product, but there is a lot of ongoing research, as I mentioned, from academia and industry. And for you that you are not very familiar with 3D printing, the very definition of these technologies is that 3D printing is a process where we can produce or construct objects by relying on a layer-by-layer deposition of materials on a computer-controlled build platform. So there is an unlimited number of technologies. Some of them you can see here. I'm not going to go in detail, but for example, called fused deposition modeling, selective laser sintering, or stereolithography. I will give you a taste today because of time limitations. I will give you a taste how this has been used from colleagues, but also from industry in order to print pharmaceutical dosage forms. And the last 5 years, there is actually shift on research of how to make 3D printed medicine at the point of care, which means printing in a hospital or even a pharmacy. The reason is that by using such technologies, we can print what we call personalized medicine. So those medicines can meet the specific needs of different populations, like elderly people or children. Introducing a point-of-care application of 3D printing, this will have an effect and will decrease the healthcare system expenses, which are associated with side effects and hospitalization. Will also reduce costing related to packaging, prescribing, and dispensing. And actually, it might affect the long storage stability or the need for long storage stability, because those forms are printed and are supposed to be consumed within a few days. So we talk then for a transition from a manufacturing-centric to consumer-centric value and decentralized supply chain. So the next few examples will give you an idea of how 3D print technologies have been used. For at least 3 years, we collaborate with pharmaceutical companies, And we try to identify technologies because, as I mentioned, there's a number of technologies that can be used for 3D printing, but not a lot of them are suitable for point-of-care applications. So working with companies like Bristol Myers Squibb, we try to identify 3D printing that or 3D printers that we can place in a hospital. So we introduced a technology which is called Microextrusion. In simple terms, as you can see on the bottom schematic diagram, this is a technology where you have a cartridge, you place your powder form, so you don't have to do any prior work. You just put your cartridge with the powder form and you can start printing, which means the technology is dispensable. You can replace the cartridge when you are done or when you run out of material. So this technology has several benefits. It can be used to print a wide range of formulations such as solid or even semi-solid formulations, print complex designs. You can see that some of them on the top images we have some pediatric dosage forms with funny shapes like a heart or a circle or a banana shape. But what is important is that we can control the macroporosity, and that means we can customize the dissolution rate of the API. And of course, if you design the formulation properly, you can you can increase the solubility of water-insoluble drug substances by making solid dispersions. Another benefit is that you can also increase the drug loading in the dosage form that is printed. So this is an example of a case study we did. We use ibuprofen as a model API, like most of our colleagues. And you can see on the right image that the dissolution profiles were very rapid. Usually we expect ibuprofen to dissolve in a lower rate, but within 5 to 10 minutes we were able to release almost 100% of ibuprofen irrespectively of the shape of the design. This technology, one of the advantages is that we can increase palatability for pediatric dosage forms because we can incorporate sweeteners or even flavors like banana flavor or orange flavor. And we did a panelist study to investigate the aroma effect or even the taste masking. So this is another study similar to what we did. There was another group in Netherlands where they developed semi-solid dosage form by using the same technology. As you can see on the image, they develop a hydrogel, they place that in the cartridge, and then they can print, they can have a small batch manufacturing in a hospital. This study was done in a hospital, and the aim was to investigate the bioequivalence of a particular product, but also, which is a key thing for printing at the point of care, to apply GMP standards and also quality control standards. This is a key thing for any product made at the hospital. So what they did, they printed a range of dosage forms of sildenafil, and there was a comparison with the marketed product, which is called Revatio. So they apply a crossover design, which was actually they have two different groups of participants. The first one would be administered the 3D printed pills, and the other one the commercial product, and the aim was to investigate the bioequivalence. As you can see here, the 90% confidence intervals of the 3D printed dosage forms were quite within the desired limits. So practically, the researchers managed by printing at the hospital to match the bioequivalence of a known product. This was the first trial that has been done after 2015, or at least one of the first studies that show that this is doable. This is something we can achieve at the hospital. There are a few things. I have the honor to lead the consortium, and we received some funding from UK government. Actually, it's called Innovate UK, where the idea was to collaborate with two companies. One is Delta Pharmaceutics, Cubic Extrusion, based in the UK, but also with Aristotle University and one of my good colleagues, Professor Fatouros. So in this case, we again the aim is to print solid dosage forms and administer them to patients that suffer from stroke. One of the things that we have to investigate is not only the bioequivalence, which we have recently started. Unfortunately, I don't have data to present to you, but we have to investigate the dissolution profiles or even the printing times. Printing time such technology is very important because you don't want to be at the hospital and start the printing process, which will take about a day. So we can see some of these print dosage forms. They are fast melting tablets. You put them on the tongue, and those disappear within 30 seconds. So these were typical examples that we can apply 3D printing at the point of care. I'll show you a few other cases, which this time we use what we call 3D printing microneedles, and those are, if you are not familiar, microneedles are medical devices. They're miniature devices which are very, very short, but they can effectively pierce the skin and deliver drug substances. So for this in this particular case, we use another technology which has very high printing resolution, and it's called stereolithography. And the reason is that these materials, there is a range of materials that we can use. They have high biocompatibility. Because of the resolution complex, we can print complex designs that they have high mechanical strength. So these microneedles, as you can see, some of them, we have some micro-CT images. They are very, very tiny. And there is a flexibility to print solid microneedles where you apply the API on the surface, or you can have hollow microneedles where you can administrate a liquid formulation. So those microneedles, they can effectively pierce the skin without causing any pain. This is quite important. And they have the capacity to transfer or administrate a wide range of materials. This is a video clip that one of my students made. These are hollow microneedles, just to show you that there is no limitation, although we have very tiny channels within this material, to administrate liquid formulations. I want to see if the video clip plays. Not sure it plays. Could you make it play? So you could see the liquid formulation coming out. This is just water, and it shows the flow of water. Anyway, the idea was to, one of our first studies was to investigate insulin delivery through skin. And we all know that diabetic patients administrate using injections, and the idea was to use insulin as a macromolecule and see how effectively the administration is. These are some release profiles which we did in vitro by using front cells and use pig skin to prove that the release profile was very fast. Within the first 2 minutes, we have more than 70% of the drug, of the biomolecule administrated. Of course, this is not good enough when we talk about a significant disease like diabetes. So we ran some animal trials where we compared our microneedle administration with hypodermic injections, and we found that we can have a remarkable hypoglycemia control by using microneedles. As you can see some of these graphs, which I'm not going to go in detail, we found that we have the same onset action compared to hypodermic needles, but also the duration of microneedles, 3D printed microneedles administered in insulin was longer. It was at least 2 hours longer. This was very important, which has also an effect on the glucose levels in the blood, but also the insulin levels that we measured. We did further work on using microneedles for skin cancer treatment, and you can see some of the animals we use. The home office allowed us to apply the microneedles only for 1 hour, where you can see that we tried different approaches, but we found that the administration of anti-cancer drugs using microneedles had a significant effect on the tumor regression. Of course, we tried different approaches. One was to apply the microneedles on the skin, on the tumor, and the other in an area which is adjacent to the tumor. Within 4 days, we see significant results on tumor regression. So this is another example of how we can use 3D printing technologies not only for pharmaceutics, but developing medical devices. And I have a very last example to show to you that we can use 3D printing for engineering nanoparticles. So again, by using high-resolution 3D printing technologies, we can actually design and then print microfluidic arrays. If any of you is familiar with these arrays or marketed devices, they cost more than 40,000 pounds, but it will take me like 5 to 10p to print one of these designs. As you can see, the beauty of this technology is we can not only print the arrays with microchannels, but also we can embed different designs within the array that will allow us to increase the turbulence and then the formation of very small nanoparticles. On the left, you can see how the design looks like when we almost develop that using AutoCAD, where we have different lengths or different designs on this work. And we have also some SEM images. And this tiny device, which confirms the high resolution, the printing capabilities of this technology. What is important to understand here is that you see how tiny the device is, and we can make at least 10 milliliters per minute. We can go even more if we wish, if we want, but this is where we actually try to limit because of the cost of materials. And this is another collaboration we have with Professor De Mezos from the School of Pharmacy here in Athens. Just the final slide, which shows if there are a few parameters that we have to control in order to engineer nanoparticles, and those are the flow rate, the total flow rate, the flow rate ratio between the aqueous and the organic phase that we mix by using these technologies, and also the total flow rate. So we can see results. We see actually that the particle size reduces as we increase the flow rate, and that makes sense because we actually increase the turbulence within our system. So, in conclusion, 3D printing has introduced a new era in pharmaceutical manufacturing. We have a change in the landscape of patient treatment by making personalized dosage forms and patient-centric models. Of course, these personalized dosage forms are expected to improve the clinical outcomes and, of course, the well-being of patients. And I believe that we are in the event of healthcare transformation with more things to come in the near future. I would like to thank you for your attention and your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Douroumis. Exciting work and perfect timing. Any burning question for this talk? Okay, nothing burning, so we move on to the third and last but not least invited presentation. Is Goussis, who is a professor at Khalifa University in the United Arab Emirates. Professor Goussis has gotten his PhD in mechanical and aerospace engineering at UCLA. Then he moved to Princeton for a few years before coming back to Greece. First at the University of Patras and then at the National Technical University of Athens, until 7 years ago when he moved to Khalifa University. Professor Goussis will talk to us about multi-scale analysis of the COVID-19 waves in Greece. Professor Goussis.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I just want to explain why I have this picture. This picture is a very nice place close to where I live. But the reason I included this photo here is because I want to pay attention to surfaces, very beautiful surfaces that are generated in the desert. Now, this is because I will start my talk with very simple mathematics that have to do with surfaces, and then I will talk about how these mathematics are applied in two different problems that are of interest here. Okay, so when we model a certain process, we have an initial condition, and then there is the steady state that is where the problem is landing. So here with blue, I have two different initial conditions. With red is the final state. Now, in general, the processes that we get from one initial condition to the final state is different. So, for example, we can have such two different paths. Now, this is a very difficult situation for us that we do modeling because you understand we have to analyze an infinite number of paths. Now, luckily, in real life, and especially in biology, things are much easier. And I will show you what happens in reality with a very simple problem. I will start with a three-dimensional problem, and I will show you paths that are generated when I start from when the initial condition corresponds to three different points in this three-dimensional space. So here's the first trajectory. you see that the transition from the initial condition to this surface here is extremely fast. And then the path follows a very slow evolution. Now, so we have a fast attraction, a slow evolution. Now, in reality, in practical situations, we don't care about the very fast transition. Okay, this transition takes practically 0 time. All we care about is the slow transition. So let's see another initial condition. You see here, again, we have a very fast transition, and you see that the new trajectory is attracted along the old one. So here we have 2 fast attractions, 1 slow evolution. I can keep adding new trajectories. We're going to have more fast transitions, but only 1 slow evolution. So this shows you that if we're interested in analyzing a very complex problem, we don't have to consider all possible dimensions. In this case, 1, I will show you, or 2 dimensions are enough, because you see, here is the 3rd trajectory, which is not attracted to the other 2 trajectories, but only at the final stage. Now, it turns out that in this case, this 3-dimensional problem can be reduced into a 1-dimensional problem in this region here, and a 2-dimensional problem in this region here. So when we're dealing with a very complex problem, the aim of the modeler is to come up with the very simple problems that model the transition, the evolution of the physical process along these very reduced dimensions. Now, these ideas, the idea that I just described, was first introduced by a very famous French mathematician, Henri Poincaré. And this is the report that he produced introducing these ideas. Now, other people came in over the years. These theories became very elaborate, and they found applications in many, many problems. Now, the problem where these theories found the most use is the well-known Michaelis-Menten problem. Now, here I list 3 first publications, okay, which, as you can see, are all at the start of the previous century. These publications and all the other ones that follow, which are many hundreds, they all try to find the reduced model. By the way, the scientists we're honoring today also contributed, okay, to this effort, and here are 3 publications of his. So in summary, if I can summarize the work done the last more than 100 years, is shown here. The model can be parameterized into these 2 coordinates, m and n, and you see here shaded are 3 regions. In each of these regions, the model, the 1-dimensional model that applies, is shown here. So you can see there are 3 different models, and this fact, I mean, the first model was introduced in 1923, the very first. Okay, the other 2 followed later. But since then, there has been a fight on which model is the best, which model produces, extends more to the parameter space or to the phase space. And it was only lately, in 2018, that when an algorithm was produced that put Poincaré's ideas into an algorithm that can be executed without any human intervention, that this problem was solved. So I'm not going to go deep into this algorithm, but I will show results that we can get using this algorithm, first on the COVID problem, and then on a pharmaceutical problem. Now, modeling COVID or getting predictions, of course, you know, it's a very, very difficult problem. our host, Professor Maseras, has contributed to that. I will just present you the problem here. It is based on data from Korea. It is only, as you can see, during a week. And what I will show you is that if we add one more data point, we get completely different prediction. This is predictions about people that are infected. So this is what happens. Okay, add 1 point, get this prediction. Add one more data point, get this prediction. Okay, and so on. So this really demonstrates the problem we're facing when we're making predictions on pandemic problems. And this is the reason why very elaborate techniques, mathematical techniques, were invented to resolve this problem. So what the method I mentioned can do is it can provide qualitatively results. Okay, so I will discuss here a few of them just to give you an idea what I'm talking about. The results I will present now is based on this very simple population model. Actually, the qualitative conclusions that we can get are independent of the model that we can use. But anyway, this is what we use. And here I have plotted 3 different waves during 2021. Now, the dots are the data, active cases, and lines are the predictions. Now, you see that, of course, as expected, predictions are very bad. Okay, but if you look at the period in which the wave grows, okay, where we have an exponential growth, the predictions are good. I mean, the curves fit well the data. Okay, so on the basis of this, we can get many quantities that can assess physically or qualitatively the problem. One of these quantities is the time scale. That is the time scale that characterizes the growth of the pandemic. And here are the results. Now, results, as you can see for each wave, results were obtained in 2 periods, one short, one wider, just to assess the robustness of the results. And what you can see here is, for example, for the first wave, at the start of the wave, the time scale is about 7 days. At the end is almost a month. So that means that the growth slows down. The slowest of the 3 waves is wave 5. That was during the summer of that year. People were out, okay? Transmission was not so frequent. The most intense wave is the 6th, and we'll explain later why. So time scale is one qualitative result that we can get from this analysis. Now, a second result that we can get is to see which of the steps in this model can contribute in this time scale, okay? Because as I said, small time scale means intense growth, large time scale means things go smooth. So if we look at the next slide, okay, here on the left, here you see how much the various paths here contribute to the time scale that characterizes the growth. You see that the step 1 and step 2 promote the explosiveness of the wave, while rate 4, which is from infected to recovered, opposes the growth. Okay, so these are, of course, reasonable conclusions. Okay, but you see what is nice with this technique is we can monitor the progress of the growth and get an assessment of how this proceeds, okay? Because if, for example, the processes, the paths that oppose the growth, okay, then we know that we're going soon to a plateau. Here are similar results for the the 3 waves. So if we look at the first is basically what we discussed before. And the conclusion from that is that density of the 4th wave is promoted by the first 2 paths, is opposed by the 4th, as expected. Now, if we move to the next wave, you see now that the opposing 4th path moved up, okay, became stronger. So this is the reason why this wave was the smoothest of all. And if we go to the 6th wave, we see now that the 2nd path, that means people exposed, becoming infected, becomes also very strong. Okay, so probably this is due to the widespread, to the wider dispersion of the Omicron variant that was the dominant one in these years to the general population, and also to the social measures that were not enacted during this period. So these are some qualitative results. I only limited my discussion to the explosive growth. There are similar results and more results to the decaying mode. And these are typical conclusions that we can reach when we analyze population model on the basis of these new mathematics that I mentioned before. So I will conclude my talk today by discussing a very counterintuitive result in pharmacodynamics. Now, what you see here is a very simple TMDD model. You see 3 inputs, or possible inputs of the drug, and here's the reaction that takes place in the central compartment. Now, let's concentrate on reaction 7. Reaction 7 brings the drug from the tissue compartment inside the central compartment. Now, you would expect, if you make this reaction faster, okay, you will get more L and less LT. Okay. Now, if you look at the computations, this is indeed what happens at an early stage. You see, at an early stage, when you double the reaction rate, you get more L and less LT. But if you go downstream, you find, of course, less LT as expected, but you also find much less L as well. Okay, so this is a very counterintuitive result. Okay, because as I said, when you make reaction 7 faster, you expect less of this, more of this. Okay, but we get less of this. Now, the reason for that is the following. Suppose you have this space here. The Y's can be concentrations of the drug in different compartments. And suppose that you have a reaction that acts along this direction. Okay, so suppose that you want to increase the concentration of Y2. So that means you make this faster, okay, more intense. Now, it might happen that this problem, this trajectory, evolves on a surface like the one I showed you before. And suppose this is the surface here. Now, if the process evolves along this surface, we can split this reaction in 2 parts. One part that is tangent to the surface, another part which is perpendicular. Now, since the motion is confined along the surface, it is only this component that is active. This is doing nothing. Okay, so basically, while you start with this reaction, when you make this reaction more intense, in a sense, you make this reaction more intense. So instead of increasing Y, as you expected, in reality, you decrease it. So these are recently we published some results these results on monoclonal antibody model, and I'm in the process of identifying such physical counterintuitive results in other models as well. And with this, I would like to conclude my talk. I try to present you some simple stuff on what mathematics can do in problems of biology and pharmacodynamics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Exciting work as well. Any questions? Okay.
Pathologist. I study microcosm. Sometimes I'm ask me, say, bio, chemical, mathematical, physical. All this science is one. And the lectures we just heard proved this idea. We cannot have medicine without physics, chemistry, biology, and of course, mathematics and algorithms. Thank you very much for your attention.
So true, so true. We now have a half-an-hour break. The coffee break, we'll move to the room where the rest of the day and the conference will be held. So go down these wonderful stairs, turn roughly 180 degrees, get out in the atrium, and across the corridor diagonal is where the Argyriadis room is, and where you will have refreshments, a coffee break, and in half an hour, the next session will start. And you stay there, you take all your stuff, and take a good look, a last look on this wonderful room. The rest of the meeting is somewhere else. Thank you.